And as of 1972, Japan was dependent on the oil from the Middle East for about 80%, and oil accounted for about 74% of the primary energy sources of Japan. So I did a simple math, and Japan was dependent on the Middle East for 60% of its energy supply. However, Japan was little interested in nor informed about the Middle East. And that's why there was a big panic during the oil crisis. And those dependency numbers that I just mentioned, you see other numbers here too, 1973, 1987, and that's when the dependency on the Middle East was the lowest, and also 2021. In the beginning of this conference, Degawa-san mentioned that Japan's dependency on the oil from the Middle East is getting higher, but as far as the primary energy source, it's 30%. Compared to 1973, it's getting lower. However, it's still not low enough to say that it's negligible. Anyhow, Japan learned a lot of lessons from the first oil crisis, and we put countermeasures. So when the second oil crisis happened, because of those countermeasures that we put in place, there was no panic like the one that we experienced in the first oil crisis. Conversely, in the Gulf region, there was what we call a reverse oil shock, where they learned a hard lesson that if the oil price was too high, that could topple their economic system. And after that, in the following years, Japan continued to be impacted by what happened in the Middle East, even though they were thousands of miles away. In 1990, during the oil Gulf crisis, there was a number of Japanese people taken hostage, myself included. And also, that was a year when the self-defense forces were dispatched overseas for the first time. In 2000, Arabian Oil Company failed to renew the oil concession with Saudi Arabia, and 9/11 in 2001, Iraq War in 2003. So what happens in the Middle East have continued to impact the livelihood of Japanese people and the policies of the Japanese government. It's still true today. From here, I want to discuss how Japan should engage with the Middle East. Middle East has the largest oil and fossil fuel reserves. But even beyond 2050, Japan said that they are achieving the net zero in 2050. But even beyond that, oil and natural gas of Middle East will continue to be important to Japan. And also they are in the advantageous position in terms of renewable energy sources and hydrogen and ammonia. So their role will continue to be important to Japan. And on the other hand, they are the hotspots of many international conflicts, and unstable Middle East will destabilize the world. So in this sense, as Japan, we always want them to stay stable. And in the meantime, China is becoming more visible, and partially because the US is losing its visibility. So as Japan, we should strengthen the alliance with the US and the partnership with Israel and India in face of China's increasing influence. And in order to maintain the presence of Japan, what should we do? To answer this question, I must say that the economic presence of Japan is becoming less and less recently. And I was there in 1980s to 1990, but at that time, most of the home appliances that I saw in the Middle East were made in Japan. But it's very rare now. So under those circumstances, Japan has to think how we can leverage our strength. And for that, we have to think what are the needs of the Middle Eastern countries. For example, anime, video games, esports, and entertainment. Those are the areas of interest of the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia. And also, those are the areas of strength of Japan. So we have to make the most of it and to deepen the relationship with the Middle East. And outer space development and robotics, those also fit the needs of the Middle East. So that's the other areas that Japan wants to find a way in. And as far as the diplomacy with the Middle East, what's important is the personal networking of political leadership. Finally, the pandemic was over. So in July this year, Prime Minister Kishida went to visit Middle Eastern countries, and Foreign Minister Hayashi as well. So, like this, we are trying to strengthen the ties with the Middle East, but how effective those efforts will be, we have to keep an eye on this point. So, lastly, I want to go over very quickly not only the oil, well, of course, the stable supply of oil will be very important to Japan, but the production cost of oil in the Middle East is cheaper than the rest of the world, so they will stay in the market for a long time, even after 2050. So we have to make sure that Japan does not get edged out of the market due to the stronger buyers like China and India. And also renewable energy sources, hydrogen and ammonia, they are also in an advantageous position, so we have to work with them. And they are a good export market as well as investment destination. Especially, we have to engage deeply in the economic reform vision of those countries. And as highlighted in the visits by Prime Minister Kishida and Foreign Minister Hayashi, the negotiations for FTA agreement is another area that we have to push forward. In the meantime, how much do we know about the Middle East? Do we have enough knowledge? I don't think so. Every time an incident happens in the Middle East, the experts like us are called by the politicians to give them a context of the incident. But every time we do, we have to start all over again and give them the Middle East 101 lecture. So by expanding our knowledge and understanding regarding those countries, we have to further the relationship with them. And lastly, I want to mention the danger of being possessed by the notion of pro-Japan. Whenever those, the oil crisis, Gulf crisis, and the Iraq War, when those kinds of negative events happen, we always get asked, why do they do that to us? Why do they harm us? I thought that they love Japan. And yes, that's true that they love Japan. But if you think that they never do any negative things to Japan just because they love Japan, that's not true. They like Japan, but that's one thing. And pursuing their own national interest in their foreign policies is another thing. We can't get mixed up on that. If you think that Japan is immune to any harm, no matter what, because they are pro-Japan, you are delusional. I apologize that I went too fast on the last slide, but that concludes my part. Thank you very much.
それでは、小山先生お願いいたします。